And I'm back. For those of you who are excited for the Pen Dog series, that will be next episode. Sorry. Anyways, to finish off the animatronic line for Repeating Melody, let's get into the last pieces of lore that we're going to talk about in this finale. So last time we talked a little bit about Chica's spirit. We talked about how not last time. What ended up happening was the last few times I mostly went into talking about the design, and I went into talking about, I gave you a showcase of my middle school design, so there's an official version of that, and there's a little treat in the video later you'll see relating to that. Honestly, that puts me in a pretty tough spot, because basically all the stuff that I want to talk about, all the stuff that could be talked about, Christine/Crystal or Chica, anything further than what I've discussed so far would be a spoiler. Same thing for Jeremy and Theodore or Teddy and his sister Frankie. So that makes it a little difficult to discuss what else to talk about. I also could talk about Thomas, which is the kid who is one of the missing kids, probably the one inside of Golden Freddy, or I should say Goldie. And you did see his design, or at least his old design from middle school, from a few videos ago. But a lot of his story is a super spoiler for the series, which I may or may not develop, so I'm a little bit on the fence on that one. I guess if we have to talk about something, I guess we should talk about the owners, since I haven't discussed them, even though the art is super unrelated to this point. To set up the series, let's talk about what led to the creation of the Friendship Freddy Fazbear Gang and this new line of animatronics. Basically, the way this series fits into the timeline is the story takes place 7 years after the creation of this restaurant. And this restaurant was created 2 years after the burning of Fazbear Fright. So it's in the future in the sense that Fazbear Fright, I believe, if we've all agreed upon, was created in 2030, which is coming up pretty soon, actually. So this is taking place in jeez Louise, what is that, 2040? 2040 something. I can't do math very well on the spot. I do a lot of these videos without a script because I tend to get nervous when reading a script, and then I stumble more than I would if I just spoke off the top of my head. Of course, I have scripts for my more, cinematic or story-driven episodes, but for stuff like this, I just kind of just talk off the cuff and then edit out the parts I fumble up and fuck up on. That's why there's weird little, nips and gips in my fucking talk. Because I use the word all the fucking time, and I go I really shouldn't be making fun of myself. Anyways, the point is the restaurant owners of this location bought the franchise off of their friend who originally tried to do the Fazbear Fright thing but ended up getting burnt down. In this universe, Fazbear Fright was more of someone who bought the IP to try to make a horror attraction based off of the stories, because basically by this point, the idea of trying to make Freddy Fazbear an actual restaurant again after how many terrible things happened is pretty much perceived as a terrible fucking business venture. However, that doesn't stop the owners of the restaurant. So while their friend bought the IP with the intention of making a horror attraction, the friend who has intentions to open up another restaurant basically share the rights to it. I'm probably not explaining this very well. Let me explain this again. In my AU, Phone Dude, the voice guy from FNAF 3, is the one who bought the IP, or at least is the assistant of the guy who bought the IP. And they both bought the IP to make a horror attraction. They, however, are friends with someone else who helped them buy the IP, because buying something that expensive and the rights to something from someone else is kind of expensive. So it was kind of a group effort. It's just that one guy had an idea of what he wanted to do with it and the other two did not. So let me explain. I believe in the original AU that I made Phone Dude just like an employee of the one other dude. I never gave him a name. He was basically just like the guy. So, okay. So let me explain this friend group to you, because This makes me realize I should probably explain the friend group, or at least the outline of it that I had in my head as a kid. There's like the business guy who wants to make the horror attraction. And then there's the two people who want to create the restaurant, the owners. One of them is Thomas's mom. And Thomas's mom, as you know, goes missing and is eventually found dead. So she dies basically around the same time as the incident. And I'll let you know now, she's not the killer. And it's pretty obviously she's not the killer because she stumbles across the killer and what the killer's doing and gets him killed for it. Specifically, she starts realizing somebody's messing with the cameras because she normally runs the show at nighttime, acting as both a owner, a manager, and a night person because, save some money. Also, she's kind of nocturnal. She's a tinkerer. She's really the engineer behind the project, a real Henry Emily of the situation. And because of that, she ends up getting lured to the restaurant looking for her son and then getting killed. And her body's found outside the restaurant. The other owner is a man, and that guy has like 2 daughters who I have not mentioned up until this point, or maybe I have, but I haven't really mentioned it. And as for the guy who owns Fazbear Fright, I never really dug too deep into him, mostly because this is a early known fact, but the person who owned Fazbear Fright died in a car accident. Basically, on the night that the horror attraction burnt down in my AU, I made it so that they're on the road getting the news that the attraction is burning down, and because the road is wet because it rained the night before, they get into a car accident. But now that I think about it, burning down a restaurant after it rains is a bad idea because it wouldn't burn too well. But at the same time, it also kind of works out because we all know that Springtrap survives the fire afterwards. So if the building's a little damp until the outside never really catches on fire and burns, that means the burning's a little bit more slow, which lets Springtrap survive. Although the fate of Springtrap after FNAF 3 in my AU is slightly different. That's because when I created the AU, all there was FNAF 3. I didn't know about FNAF 4. And even when there was FNAF 4, sister location, there was no continuation of the Springtrap story. So I had no idea what they were planning on doing with him. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of what they ended up doing with him. Like, don't get me wrong, I do love Pizzeria Simulator. And it's just I really hate the Springtrap design they had, or I should say William Afton, since it's technically not called Springtrap in the files. We all call him fucking Peanut, or what was it, Scrap Trap. Anyways, I understand that Five Nights at Freddy's was originally created as a little horror game that Scott made to sort of joke off the insult that his animations looked like those stiff animatronics that they have at pizzerias. And then eventually it turned into a child-friendly horror game because it doesn't show blood and gore or have sexuality in it. So it's something safe for like 13 to teenagers to play without being exposed to like some really messed up stuff, because a lot of horror content nowadays heads specifically for adults and doesn't have anything for like preteens. I just wish it stayed family friendly but evolved so adults can enjoy it instead of staying in a very kiddie way. Anyways, time to get into the final design. First off, we have the first version of the design. Well, not first version. This is the version that lets you see what's really underneath. The first one in the corner shows what she looks like underneath her wings and underneath her leg fluff. And the second one shows her with her leg fluff. As you are probably noticing, Chica only has 3 fingers instead of the usual 4 or 5. And that is because, again, she has wings. So she has a thumb-like finger and 2 long fingers that connect to the tips of her wings. So she can direct them and point them and sort of use them as hands. But as you know, she doesn't have the full finger grip, so her grip isn't the strongest. The next version clearly shows what Chica looks like with her wings. The first image shows what her wings look like when they're completely tucked in around her, and the second one shows when she's put her wings directly to her side or when she stretches them out. This version also includes her eyelashes, a trait that she has by herself, unlike the other animatronics. Mostly because she's supposed to be the soft, fluffy girl character. Therefore, they decided to give her eyelashes on her hard, metallic eyelids to make her look more soft and gentle. Next, we have Chica's dress by itself without Chica in it. I thought it was important to have a version of her dress which is not covered up by her wings or her body, so you can see directly what it's supposed to look like. As you notice, like most Chica variants, she has a form of bib with the words "Let's eat." However, her bib isn't actually a bib, it's more of a apron attachment that's connected to the center belt of her dress. You'll also notice that her dress looks like a cupcake. These are details that I've mentioned last time when the dress has popped up, but I just wanted to re-explain them to make you understand the formal design. There's a bit of a little surprise at the end that I'll show you, but for now, that's basically all this is. And voila, we get to the piece de resistance, Chica, in her completed form. We have Chica with her tucked wings on the left, and then on the right, we have Chica with her wings spread out. As you can see, this is what Chica would normally look like while performing. None of the other versions are something that customers would ever see. Chica's supposed to be fully clothed because it's that weird cartoon logic where the men can be basically naked except for a few accessories, but the women have to be fully clothed. Kind of like a classic Sonic type situation. Chica's not supposed to ever be seen without her outfit. Chica's also not supposed to be seen without her wings. But as you can see, there is something underneath the fluff. Chica is incredibly difficult to clean, and the worst part is she needs to be cleaned the most, meaning that she tends to be out of commission the most, because she needs to be deeply cleaned. This is what happens when you program an animatronic around food, but then make their design the most needs to stay out of the kitchen character you can possibly make her. And lastly, we have our little treat that I wanted to save for last. Ta-da! I made an alternate version of my Chica design using the original colors from my Chica AU from my middle school days. As you can see, if my modern art skills were applied to that design, this is roughly what she would have looked like. And honestly, I don't hate it, but I'm going for a little bit more pastel cute vibe. So we're sticking with the cupcake dress, especially since we're not making an actual cupcake. So, you're probably wondering, where does that leave us in the series? We've completed the main Frio, we've completed Foxy, and we've completed Melody. Well, Melody was one of the first to be completed since she's the main star of the show of this AU. So, what's left? Well, I did mention Goldie, the mysterious yellow bear, or the Golden Freddy equivalent of this universe. And of course, I mentioned that Goldie and Melody were originally a part of a band that was made as an homage to the original Freddy Fazbear building. You know, the Fredbear's Family Diner type shit. So, next episode is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be a speed paint because, let's just say, making Goldie and making this, well, let's just say Spring Bonnie equivalent, wasn't really fun to record from what I can tell you right now. It's basically just the process of making the designs for, Friendship Bonnie and Friendship Freddy, except recolored and with some slight variations. So we'll go over their designs and a smidgen of lore for each. And then we're going to go into showing off what all the characters look like. And then the next time we're going to make a video in this franchise will be when I start the process of designing some of the human characters. But right now, that's going to be on pause until I work on other projects. As you know, I have a shit ton of other projects, and I really have been neglecting them. So, now that I have a new iPad and the storage capacity to actually work on these videos, I'll be working on new content. It was good having you around, and thank you for your participation in this little AU. Love ya! Bye-bye!